All right, welcome. Final lecture of the semester, final kind of content academic level lecture where we're learning about new buildings of the semester. I will record one final lecture, which will be a final exam prep, which will include buildings only from the last four lectures. So what we're covering today is a time period really from 1977 up until what I refer to as current times. I think the last building we look at is the Oslo Opera House, and I want to say that's 2005. Okay, so Snoetta did that building in 2007. So this is basically getting us to contemporary times. Some real exciting work. So I'm anxious to get into it. And without further ado, let's jump in. What you're looking at here is the Centre Pompidou, the Pompidou Center. And this is designed by, it's a competition that's won by two partners, Renzo Piano, a Genoese Italian architect, and Richard Rogers, his partner, who I believe is British born, definitely practiced in the UK. Renzo is still with us, born in 1937. Richard Rogers was born in 1933, passed in 2021. They win this competition in 1977. The point of is we're going to learn why this is actually a very important project and really a turning point in how architects solve architectural problems and really sort of creative approach. And in this case, the creative approach to otherwise kind of boring and ordinary, typically overlooked things that Piano and Rogers really celebrate with the Pompidou Center. The impetus of the project is former president Georges Pompidou, who I believe served from 69 to 74, has left office, and they basically want to build a new museum for the city, and an event center and a convention center, exhibit hall. I don't know if he donated the money, but ultimately the center is named after him. But it's a public project, it's a government project. Really, it's a cultural center is what it's referred to as. And it attracts on the order of about 3 million visitors per year to the various kind of museum spaces, the exhibit spaces, etc. What are Rogers and Piano doing that's so interesting here? Let's start with the red. And basically the building is color coded. And what they're doing with red is they're taking circulation, so interior stairs, interior elevators, escalators, things that normally would happen in what we refer to as the core at the center of the building, because you need a lot of kind of structure and opaque areas, because these are not necessarily light-seeking spaces. Elevator is really just to get somebody vertically through a building, and we don't really think about the quality of it as often as we probably should. What they're doing is they're saying, screw that. We're going to flip the idea on its head. We're going to basically put the entire circulation system of the building on the outside. Actually, not only on the outside, but even outboard of the facade. So there is kind of Corbusian elements to this. I mean, these guys, obviously studied Corb's work as they were coming up, but that's one. The mechanical systems, the ductwork, the stuff that delivers the hot and cold air in the building, they say, let's not do what 99.9% of people in the past have done, which is try to hide those things or kind of put them on the inside of the building and minimize their impact. Let's celebrate them. So they put all the ductwork on the outside, and they paint actually the ductwork blue to kind of signal to you when you're looking at the facade, okay, blue is mechanical. Green, for example, I don't know if that's water or waste, but everything is basically color coded, and clearly everything is moved completely to the outside of the building. Even the struts that you're seeing in white, there's a section diagram I'm going to explain a little bit, so pay close attention to this horizontal strut, and this vertical rod. So you're looking up at the facade in this picture, and then there's the cross bracing, the tension members here, kind of keeping the tension in the building system. So structures painted white, HVAC's painted blue. I think that might be waste painted green, elevator circulation. So basically, it's a celebration of the systems of the building, and they're put really for the public to see on the far outside of the building. Oh, here we go. So there's a view of kind of what. So that's the main thing they're doing. The second thing Piano and Rogers are doing is you can kind of start to see it here. I've got a picture coming up where you'll get a real clear view of it. But by developing this system where the structure is able to basically span these tremendously long volumes without needing any intermediate columns, which they execute by pulling the beams through the last bearing column line and actually developing this pinion system, which is separating. Yeah, here you go. There's a good diagram here where the extending out of the floor beam, if you will, by adding this armature on the outside and introducing a dual rod system is actually able to. I've talked about kind of this separation of the distance between tension and compression. When I've talked about it in the past, we've always talked about it in the horizontal plane. I'm not a structural engineer, so I'm not going to pretend to understand how the vertical members are separating the distance between tension and compression, but I certainly trust that the diagram is based on solid understanding of structural principles. And so what ordinarily a truss is doing, so like this truss, is separating the distance between tension and compression by building a bottom chord and a top chord and separating those two from one another. So the forces are able to be resolved by some distance apart from one another, which makes it more effective, which allows you to span longer distances. Piano and Rogers are actually doing that not only in the horizontal system, but also transferring that work, that technique, that effectiveness to the facade on the outside, which I believe allowed them to simply make these spans a little bit longer than what would have otherwise been possible by just spanning lightweight steel trusses and then having a column support here or a column support there. And what that does is that basically makes this a kind of a heavenly building if you're a museum curator or if you're an exhibition director or curator and you have to, year after year, month after month, put on different shows and events in a space that has lots of columns and interior walls and bearing walls and non-bearing walls. You tend to have to do your best with the spaces that you're given. Well, when you got these, I probably shouldn't try to guess at that dimension. I'm going to say probably more than 400 feet there. That's a pretty lucrative space for somebody to be able to do lots of different things in and not really have any limitation of columns and structure interfering. So in the prior slide, the trusses that you were looking at, there's a real clear view of one of those trusses now. So, whoops. That truss that you're looking at here is this truss that you're seeing in this view. What else do I need to cover on Centre Pompidou? Structure. Oh, I have the color codes here. I'm sorry. Structural is silver. HVAC is blue. Plumbing and fire are green. Electrical is yellow and orange. And the elevators or the human circulation is red. So they're basically saying we're going to invent kind of a new way to think architecture, and that is to basically celebrate the building systems. And we oftentimes now, we say, as we're kind of doing design work on projects, we say, let's celebrate the column, let's celebrate the duct, and all of those things kind of, have their genesis in what Piano and Rogers were bold and brave enough to do in the late 70s here at Centre Pompidou. Okay, next project, which is, so if Centre Pompidou is starting to depart from what at that point is a pretty well established kind of popular way of practicing modernism. If Piano and Rogers are starting to veer away from that a little bit and trying to invent something new, certainly Bernard Tschumi is going in a step further with this project, which is the Parc de la Villette project, which is really an urban park in France, but a park that has lots of different, what Tschumi calls follies within it. So structures, some are arid, some are enclosed and conditioned space, but really it's a series of buildings and installations that you'll see in one of the isometric drawings here coming up, over a really vast area of a large urban park. An urban park, I should say, that's an existing urban park. So you're looking, here at a couple, three of those follies, painted red. Tschumi loves the color red. In fact, he has a book by that title, Red is Not a Color. Okay, here's the isometric drawing that I was referring to. So the park is effectively these two masses of space. Lots of green, lots of turf. It's a prominent city park. What Tschumi does is he adds two layers on top of the park to really create his design solution. The first thing he does is he superimposes an ordered grid system over the park, creating a structured, repetitive, kind of a rhythmic consistency, which he argues in his writing about this project gives the visitor, contributes to the feeling of a sense of place. When you're moving through a large space like this and you see kind of repetition and rhythm, you tend to read all of those things you've experienced the rhythm through really as one large thing, and thereby kind of having a little bit of a cohesive experience, if not necessarily by what you're looking at visually and materially, then by the placement of these things at a consistent spacing. I'm not sure if that makes total sense. You may have to kind of watch this part a couple times. The best example I can give of where I think that phenomenological effect takes place is to us who are in Fresno. You drive around often and you see, kind of as you get to the sort of outskirts of town, or as you're driving, to out of town, to another city, sometimes you'll see farmland, and as you're driving, you can kind of like read the rhythm of the tree spacing, which it may not be so obvious where that property starts or ends, but when that rhythm of the stops, you've kind of left that property or that section of space that was really designed by one hand, if you will. And then it might be just a respite, a small moment, and then that rhythm may start again, and you're kind of in another place. So what Tschumi is trying to do with the grid system is kind of establish a sense of place through that rhythm and that consistency. He's doing it deliberately, obviously, because he already knows really where he wants to go with this project, which is the third level, which is to really superimpose over this very this very rigid and structured grid system something very abstract and unexpected, and really what looks chaotic, which are the follies of the project. Let me read actually from his writing about it. Okay, so this is the point I was making earlier. The grid provides for a sense of place and organization in an otherwise unrelated and random configuration of architectural installations. So really the random and chaotic, he didn't say chaotic, I said chaotic, unrelated and random are the third level, and the orderly and the rhythmic, the sense of place in the organization, is really the second level. And then the first level is really the park itself, the ground plane, if you will. Deconstructivist. So really what this starts is the deconstructivist movement in architecture, which can be considered a part of or a tail end of modernism and postmodernism. 35 points, so there are 35 of these follies, and really his kit of parts are three things: point, line, and surface. So it's either point, line, or surface. That's really the three things he works with to create the follies, really for his competition drawings. He wins the competition. Obviously, things change a little bit, as they always do inevitably, from what the architect designed for the competition entry. When they actually go to build, all kinds of restrictions, site constraints, development of ideas lead to kind of a change in the solution. Okay, shifting gears a little bit to this project, which is the Louvre Museum entry. The Louvre Museum, as we studied, 3 or 4 weeks ago, by Louis Laval and Claude Perrault, and actually a series of French architects even before the 17th century. Really, the 17th century building, the classical building, really, I would say high Beaux-Arts. So the facade gets added onto even after the 17th century. But the Louvre Museum proper is really the mass that's in the back of this pyramid and flanks the sides of the pyramid. What the architect here, I.M. Pei, recently passed I.M. Pei, born 1977, died in 2019. I hope I don't mess this up, but I'm pretty sure he's Chinese born, but he definitely practiced in the United States, so you could kind of consider him an American architect. One of the most prominent American architects, did a lot of amazing work. I wish I had the time to explain to you guys all of the important works from all of these important architects. Guys like Pei, I'm lucky to show you one project. I mean, with Korb, with Mies, you're seeing maybe 2 or 3, sometimes 4. With Kahn, you're seeing 3 or 4. I wish I could show you more of Pei's work, but if this piques your interest, find the time, maybe sometime over the summer after the semester's over and you've unwound. Look up Pei's work. I think you'll be very, if this work interests you, I think you'll be interested in some of his other work. The project he did in Qatar is a fascinating project. He's got a beautiful building on the National Mall in DC. Okay, but this is the Louvre entry. So what Pei designs is really the courtyard in between the three masses is called the Cour Napoleon, I think court of Napoleon. And the museum, and the Mona Lisa is in this museum, which I actually have had the privilege of visiting and being in. I want to say it's on the right-hand side of the museum, but the museum brings visitors from all over the world. There was really a problem with congestion at the entry. So competition is launched to kind of address that problem with the Louvre Museum. Pei comes up with this pretty radical idea to set a glass pyramid in the middle of this very highly traditional French sort of classical Beaux-Arts, highly ornate, detailed, opaque building. So he's doing a couple of things. First of all, he's creating a stark contrast, and playing the game of juxtaposition, as so many architects like to play. But in doing so, he is being, if you think back to the last lecture where we talked about the Kimball Art Gallery, and I made the point about how in doing something divergent, Kahn is actually being very respectful. And I pointed out 3 or 4 characteristic elements that Kahn is using to kind of restrain and sort of tip his hat or be respectful nods to the existing Beaux-Arts building adjacent to it, even though it's a fresh, kind of a modern approach, as Pei's solution is here. The similarities, or the tipping of the hat, if you will, here is, I would say, twofold. Number one, the transparency. By using glass, even though we're clearly seeing the object, the pyramid here, it's transparent. And what we're seeing actually through the pyramid is the original Louvre Museum. So, in a sense, we are magnifying the architecture of the original. And we're kind of exposing and exaggerating that opaque quality of the stone, of the brick, of the solid members beyond. That's one. The second thing he's doing is the pyramid is drawing from the mansard roofs that the Louvre Museum has originally. So the kind of playful diagonal line, he's kind of taking his inspiration from the form, I would say the prominent form, because, they're tall, the volumes kind of project up over the building. It's hard not to notice, the barrel rounded as well as the mansard roof profiles here in this building. So he's kind of riffing off of that to create the notion of the pyramid. Programmatically, what happens? It's really the entry portal. So it's this kind of brilliant move of kind of solving the congestion problem of bringing people, this is a good slide to park on, bringing people down into the underground to get them into the museum, actually through this pyramid. And then, they're able to distribute, people are able to kind of move about the museum in three different ways, I believe, from that lower space now, thereby kind of diffusing that tension really early on at the main entry point. Here's a view down below the pyramid. So the pyramid kind of ends the transparent quality there. You can see the amount of light that Pei is able to bring into an otherwise very dark space, which would have been below the Napoleon Court. And then, you can kind of see the sort of free passage spaces on either end. Mansard roof, opaque, transparent. I had in my note a marker, so I think, and I don't remember if that was from Pei's writing, but I should probably say this now, before the end of the semester, if any of you are interested in either reading up on some of these projects or reading up on more projects, there's a website called Arc Daily, and Arc Daily has a series which they call AD Classics, Arc Daily Classics. So if you search up any of the buildings that I've lectured on and you put AD Classics, very likely all of the buildings we've talked about this semester have kind of an AD Classics article. And that article oftentimes will have sections, plans, photographs, renderings, model pictures. So it'll kind of show the full gamut of what the architect was thinking, and then the project itself. And then there's actually a really good description of it. Usually they say the year of the project. It'll provide the square footage. It'll let you know if it's a part of a campus, and then cite the architect and maybe even cite some of the other design team members. So it's really, really a great resource. So I don't remember if this was from the AD article or if it was something Pei had written about his own work, but he talks about the pyramid as also a marker. My guess would be a marker more for the cultural institution that the Louvre is for French culture, not so much a marker as the entrance. Okay, so that was, I don't know if I said the year, I'm sorry, that was 1989. So Louvre, I love this photo. The Louvre Museum, 1989, Paris, France. All right, staying in the sort of deconstructivist realm, this is Zaha Hadid. Zaha Hadid, female architect, one of the best to do it, male or female. born 1950 and left us way too early at the age of 66 in 2016. This was Zaha's coming out party. This is the Vitra fire station, and this is in Weil am Rhein, Germany. I may not be pronouncing that city right, and I'm sorry if I'm not. But I think it's abbreviated Rhine, Germany. She builds this in 1993. Vitra is a Swiss. They're actually a very interesting company. They're a Swiss furniture company, but they have a campus that's basically a collection of a who's who of prominent international architects from the past 30 to 35 years. So they seek out and they invite some of the best architects in the world to basically treat their campus and their new buildings as kind of a place of experimentation. So it's this kind of kitsch collection of various architects doing experimental and exploratory things, but actually building them and creating this highly functional campus of the Vitra Furniture Company, where they're handling their manufacturing, their distribution, their showrooms, they have museums, and with a campus comes the need to make sure the buildings are safe, and so they needed a fire station for their campus, and so Zaha wins that competition to design the fire station. Her solution, I want to go to some of her design drawings. Her models are beautiful as well. So this is basically an acrylic model, and we're looking at it axonometric, or we're looking at it. We're looking at a photograph, which is perspectival down on the building. But really, what you're reading is basically the building kind of peeling away and starting to kind of define a path. And that's because where the building occurs on site of Vitra is at kind of a perpendicular intersection of two. It's on a corner of the property. And so basically she's treating the building as the tool to modulate between the street, the change in the street grid pattern. But she's doing it in a phenomenally expressive and interesting way, in my opinion. Which results in these very kind of organic, expressive kind of planes jutting out, and the playfulness of the masses and the obelisks against one another, made even more dramatic when you uplight those masses with the in-ground lights. Just a fabulous, fabulous project. So there's actually one of her study models that was featured in the museum exhibition about the Vitra fire station. She believes in visual. I should stop on one of the photographs of the building. Visual purity of materials. I think you can see that here. We're looking at cast in place concrete walls. There is nothing other than maybe the walls are sacked and patched. There is nothing applied to the building beyond the concrete that it's cast. So this idea of purity of material and form shields the campus from its neighbors as it kind of modulates the street grid. The building defines the street grid, as I mentioned. It's opaque at the oblique angle and then becomes transparent more close up. What that means is that from far away, and actually this is kind of turning the corner here on the site, from far away, the building reads as a very opaque, almost like a concrete monument, if you will. As you get closer is when you start to kind of read some of the articulation, and the opacity starts to break down, and we see some of the transparency that she's given us with the fire station. So this kind of like playfulness of the, I guess you could make an argument that this is a little bit trompe-l'oeil, like we saw in the Baroque. It's a little bit of a trick of the eye. As you get closer, the building is going from opaque to transparent. Oh, this was interesting. So kind of frozen moment hyphen. the building looks like it can burst into action at any moment, which is thought to be kind of a representation of the firemen kind of ready to respond at moment's notice. I thought that was interesting. Okay, I think I mentioned the Bilbao effect when we were talking about Jorn Utzon's Sydney Opera House. The Sydney should be celebrated for being one of the first to really tell an architect, dream big and do something that's going to put our city on the map, which Utzon does, and certainly the Sydney Opera House becomes inseparable in terms of an icon for Sydney, if not all of Australia. Frank Gehry, also does that with this building here, which is the Guggenheim Bilbao Museum in Spain, Bilbao, Spain. Frank Gehry is also still with us. He was born in 1929. I don't know what to say about Frank Gehry other than he's one of the greatest of all time. Innovative, just a brilliant architect. Does the same thing with Bilbao that Utzon did with the Sydney Opera House. The Bilbao City Commission or City Council or whoever it is that, I'm not sure if this was a competition, but however Gehry is approached and gets the commission, the program is written such that they tell him, put Bilbao on the map with this building. So Gehry designed something unlike anything we've ever seen before. He's designing this building at the confluence of several kind of urban elements. There's a river, as you see in the foreground. There's a railway, there's a freeway, and then there's the street grid of Bilbao all around. So in more than a few places, Gehry as well as others have talked about basically the building being the manifestation of the sort of undulating river, the railway, the city grid system, and kind of all these things coming together the way you can see kind of in the facade, the way the splines and the curving forms all seem to come together. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 different surfaces of volumes at one point become one vertical plane, the way the Bilbao Museum kind of brings these 3 or 4, 5 different urban forces and conditions into one thing, which is the project. There's more to talk about with the building, and I will. I should say this though before I forget, which is that the project itself starts kind of like we talked about with the City Beautiful movement and the admin building with Richard Morris Hunt and Daniel Burnham and all the wonderful architects that participated in the World Columbian Exposition, 1893, and the City Beautiful movement that launched for, you could argue still is going on today, 100 years later, 140 years later, I should say. In a similar way, the Bilbao Museum has launched what we commonly refer to as the Bilbao effect, which is, even to this day, people come to architects and say, I want you to do for my city or for my organization what the Guggenheim Museum did and Frank Gehry did for the city of Bilbao. So we call that the Bilbao effect. The materials on the museum are titanium. That's the exterior cladding that you're looking at is titanium. I've heard Gehry describe that one of the things that he's very proud of, the creative things on this project, is at the time that he's designing this building. So it was built in 97. So he was designing this in like 93, 94. At the time, there was, I think, like a commodities crash that had led to basically lots of titanium being available in surplus for relatively cheap. So he basically didn't start by saying, let me put a very expensive rather by saying, yeah, there's something available cheap right now. Let me see if I can utilize that in mass quantities to take advantage of the sort of market situation. And that's how the titanium was decided on. It wasn't, boatloads of money being available and him being irresponsible and picking the most expensive material that his whim would lead him to. Titanium, limestone, you're actually seeing the steps, the ground plane here, the base, the stylobate, if you will, of the building is limestone, and obviously glass. There are 19 galleries in this building. This is actually the largest and longest gallery. I do have a floor plan. Okay, so in this plan view, so you kind of enter the museum through here. This glass entryway that you're looking at here, and this river, are this river and this glass entryway. So this long hall that you're looking at here is actually the largest gallery of the museum, which is about 130 meters long by 30 meters wide. The picture you were looking at earlier is actually a Richard Serra sculpture that is part of the exhibition, I think the permanent collection that's in this hall. We're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 additional galleries. So actually, this is a very common Gehry thing. This is one of the reasons I like to show the floor plan for Bilbao. Gehry actually, if you study his floor plans, likes to actually solve the problem in very kind of simple, straightforward ways in plan. Where he gets really, really expressive, I would argue, is really in section. So, you can see a very kind of Cartesian or orthogonal building mass here to create these 4 galleries. And even this is, yes, there's some curvature here, but is, from a structural standpoint, is actually pretty ordinary in terms of where the walls occur and where the foundations would occur. Where he gets really playful is the reason I say in section is, this wall plane, nothing really out of the ordinary, but by thickening or really creating a distance between the interior surface where the framing or the sheetrock would be and actually the outside facade, and kind of creating these volumes even that undulate and that change, is really how he's able to create these beautiful kind of dynamic exterior forms, is by thickening or ballooning the skin of the building such that the interior can actually remain fairly ordinary, but the building can have this very out of the ordinary expression on the outside. Exoskeleton was one of my notes. There's kind of an interesting view on the inside. There's a carry through, which I don't know if this is characteristic of Gehry's work. I'm struggling to think of another project where he's done this, but I've always read that as kind of a carrying through of the opaque mass, kind of dancing with the transparent mass. I see this as kind of a carrying through of that same effect, that kind of playfulness of solid with glass. Just, a very important building to know if you didn't already. Bilbao Museum. Okay, moving to this project. This is the Reichstag. This is in Berlin, Germany. This is the seat of the German parliament. And it was the seat of the German parliament with, what was his name? The German chancellor. This is before Hitler was, I want to say Otto von Bismarck. I'm not sure about that. Again, I'm not a historian, but during World War II, the bombings in Europe, all over Europe and Asia, led to the dome of the Reichstag, which was the prior capital building, if you will, the seat of the German government before the Third Reich. Lost the dome, the historic dome on the traditional, I'm not sure, 17, 18, probably 8. I think this is neoclassical, probably 18th century, would be my guess. The point is not to study the building. It's really about what the architect does to rebuild the dome that you're looking at in the center. Sorry, I was speaking away from the microphone there. So a competition is launched to rebuild the dome of the Reichstag. This is what the dome of the Reichstag looked like before. The program didn't mandate a replication of the existing Reichstag, and it didn't say you have to do something divergent. It kind of left it open as, the building needs to be reoccupied, rebuilt. Come forward with your ideas. Norman Foster, British architect. I should do the years. Norman is with us today. He's born 1935. He proposes this solution, which is brilliant, and I'm fascinated by it every time I look at the project. Is brilliant on multiple levels. A couple things Foster is doing here. He is, one, building a transparent dome that, as a result of its transparency and the illumination of artificial lighting, in this case, from the inside, at night creates a beacon-like effect for the Reichstag building, for people all around the city to see and to take comfort in the fact that their representative government is working, is stable, is alive and well. He is allowing people to occupy the dome, which is a fascinating and unique thing if you think about it. Those of us who, in elementary school, I think we all did a trip to the sort of obligatory trip to Sacramento, where you go into the Capitol building, you look up, you spend time observing the magnificence and the beauty of the dome. We don't occupy the dome. You can't go into the dome. I don't know how many domes there are in the world that you can actually occupy, but I think it's fascinating that the German people, in getting their Reichstag building back, now are actually able to occupy the dome of their government's seat. That's two. Three, is the fact that when you're in this dome and you're looking down, you're actually looking at the assembly doing its job, serving the people. There's even kind of another layer to that where, the sort of people that are served are really at the high level in perspective with the people that are their electeds or their representatives really on the ground plane below, thereby basically elevating the public as the most important element of the German citizenry. But that's kind of the third thing that fascinates me about the Reichstag solution, is that, we can basically occupy the dome and we can kind of pause for a moment, hang out over the railing, and actually look down over government taking place, legislation being made, and, sort of representation happening real time. I should also say, to Norman Foster's credit, Norman Foster's a brilliant architect, but I should say that Foster also has a penchant and a very keen interest in sustainability and developing solutions that are also very environmentally conscious. I don't know the details of the Reichstag, but I believe just in the kind of the louvering system and the openness of the facade, the ability of kind of fresh air to get into this thing. I believe this thing is serving somewhat of a exhaust and recirculating fresh air function for the building below. Yeah, we talked about history, democracy, public accessibility, and sustainability. So he talks about the fourfold elements: history, democracy, public accessibility, which we talked about, all those things, and sustainability as being the four kind of pillars of the project for them. Okay, this project. This is the Yokohama International Transportation Terminal, passenger terminal. This is in Japan, and this was built in 2002. The competition was won in, I think, I want to say 93 or 94. I think they may have started construction in 95, and it took about 7 or 8 years to build this building. It actually was a fairly complicated building to build because this is happening. I mean, it's not, our sort of Instagram feeds now are saturated with these kinds of kind of forms and architectural designs, but it's 2023, not 2003 or 2002, let alone 1993, when the architects that were envisioning this project were actually putting together the technical drawings and trying to figure out how to actually build this building. So you can imagine the challenges and the difficulties, which inevitably led to the building taking a really long time to build. The architects were partners, Foreign Office Architects, FOA, and they are Farshid Mousavi. I know she's Persian. I believe she's Persian born, and she practices in the United States. So I guess an American architect now. And Alejandro Zera Polo, a Spanish-born architect, I believe, also practicing here in the United States. They both have kind of gone on to have their respective independent practices, but they were partners professionally and professional partners in Foreign Office Architects when they won this competition. So the project is 1,410 feet long. It's a transportation terminal. It's multimodal. You can see there's a ferry boat adjacent to the Tokyo airport is not far from the terminal. So there's a bus system that integrates in with the transportation terminal. There's lots of, you can actually see them very clearly here, pedestrian pathways that could be used for, public just kind of making their way about, wanting to, enjoy the open space and the waterfront views, or for passengers that are actually traveling through on any of the modes of transit. So it's really this kind of bringing together of multi-modes of transportation. What they talk about, what Farshid and Alejandro talk about extensively in their design intent, is that the building is less a building and is more a continuation of the topography of the adjacent site, and this kind of folding of the ground plane to create these sort of pockets and these sort of topographical conditions. And you can see it real clearly actually in this image, is that yes, it's a building, but it's almost kind of like it's programmed that's almost like slid underneath these pockets, where like the topography is kind of like just sort of pulled up a little bit like a skin, and really program is almost strategically just inserted under those pockets. You can see that kind of idea here. You can see that a little bit here. You can even get a sense of that going on a little bit here. Architectural topography, fold, twist, and rotate are the sort of three operations that they described as being parts of their sort of design toolbox. Garage is mid-level over parking. And then it's a very light light-seeking and really open top level. And then this is actually probably for me one of the more fascinating things about the project is that you're constantly, as you move through the spaces, or even if you move on the spaces, even on the outside that we're looking at here, you're constantly being reoriented. You can read that kind of in the faceting of the curvature. So your orientation, your kind of position and your point of orientation is always changing, which I think leads to some interesting things as an individual moving about a space, walking, wheelchair, riding, otherwise. The more you change direction, I think the more you're sort of forced to pay attention and be aware of your environment, and as a result, kind of more aware of the architecture and paying attention to what's going on. So I think that's actually a really clever device to get people to really pay attention to the architecture more, is constantly sort of changing the orientation of the pathways. This is another real good view of it. And this actually, you get a real good sense of their, their design objective of kind of fold, rotate, and twist is, I think, what I had said. Yeah, fold, twist, and rotate. So you really get a sense of kind of the vertical kind of folding to create the horizontal plane, and then all together kind of twisting to create the roof plane. And you get a sense of the kind of reorientation pretty clearly here in these images as well. This is a plan view of kind of how you move through the space. The car park we talked about, the transportation plaza this way, and the ferry this way. There's an overall plan view of the space. Upper level plan showing the walkways. And then sections. So not Farshid, but Alejandro tells the story of the fact that they were like maniacal about the drawings, and actually you can see it here in the quality of some of these section drawings. They were, like I said, maniacal about the amount of drawing and the detail of the drawing in how they documented this building. But incidentally, the thing, because it was, I think, such a kind of a complicated and dynamic volume and form, that they found that the contractors utilized the model or models that they had built, both sketch models and finished models. The contractors used the models more to build from than the painstaking detailed drawings that they had done. Not to say that the drawings were unimportant, but that when, especially at a time like this, when there isn't, people are doing this all over the world now, and so there's tools to document this stuff better and more effectively that make the drawings more effective as a tool to build the building. But when this is one of the first projects to kind of explore building in this kind of dynamic, complex way, there aren't a lot of people that have experience in reading drawings like that, because not many drawings like that have been made in the construction world, because at the time Yokohama is built, there aren't 100 buildings like that. And so certainly there aren't contractors that have built 100 buildings like that. So as they themselves are kind of learning how to grapple with these new forms and surfaces, they found that actually the model was one of the most effective things in helping even the builders visualize and build what they were setting out to do in that given day and in that given period. So that's Foreign Office Architects, Musavi, and Zara Polo. Okay, back to another Foster project. This is St. Mary's Axe. This is in London, England. And this was built in 2003. This is 64,500 square meters, and it's an office tower. But the most interesting thing, or one of the most interesting things, you could argue that the form is one of the more interesting things, But that alone is not why I've selected this. It's really because the innovative element of this project that I admire in Foster's team's work is actually on this one. I know more about the sustainable strategy because the twisting kind of helical pattern that you're seeing in the facade, where you see the floor plate read through a little bit more carefully, is what you probably think you're looking at, which is that you're looking through the glass at the floor plate and the column structural system, and some of the office spaces beyond. So this is where a lot of the natural light is coming through in these transparent, wider bands. The thinner, more opaque looking bands are actually they're spandrels, but behind there is basically the mechanical system that is constantly circulating exhaust air out of the building and pulling new, fresh air through the building. As a result of the kind of highly innovative approach to energy use on this building, here's a good sketch that explains it. So, this sort of shaded is, so you guys remember I made the point about Bucky Fuller. This is actually a diagram that he's even making a very literal and direct reference to Bucky Fuller's kind of geodesic dome idea, and tying it to the facade concept of his building. But the bands, the solid bands that kind of twist up, is the skin serving a mechanical function. As a result of all this is the point I was going to make. I'm sorry. As a result of all that, the building is actually able to use 50% less energy than a building of comparable building of its size would require to use. So imagine the cost savings, and then even imagine the sort of reduction in carbon footprint as a result of not having to heat and cool the building, or having to heat and cool a building with half as much energy as would ordinarily be required. And the other idea in that slide earlier, where you kind of see this almost panoramic view. The other main idea is that the shape or the form of the building actually helps create more views than a square or a rectangular orthogonal plan would create, which actually makes sense from a standpoint of kind of directionality. 40 stories tall, and then diagrid with the column-free interior. So actually you saw that in the floor plan by basically putting maybe one of the upper levels. Here we go. So by putting the diagrid, there's the main structure on the outside. At the core, there is a second level of structure, but what that allows is kind of similar to Centre Pompidou, allows us to have these kind of large column-free areas to reconfigure over and over again every time the company or the department gets restructured. And then these are the volumes where the air is actually pulling through that you're seeing here. Okay, so that's the Swiss Ray, or St. Mary's Axe. The next project is this one, which is built in 2004. This is the Seattle Public Library, and this is built by OMA, another legend architect, Rem Koolhaas, Dutch architect. I'm fairly certain this was a competition win for OMA that got them the commission. But the form is unique, but the way they describe their process, which I have no reason to believe that they're being disingenuous, the form is not the aspiration of the project. Rather, the form is the outcome of their design process of really understanding the client's needs and then creatively kind of organizing the program and stacking and flipping the program, and then saying, that's it, let's now wrap envelope around that building. I think I have a slide that will really best articulate what they're doing. Yeah, here we go. So imagine, spending months, if not, years, understanding from your client really what the program is, and then kind of going to the drawing board and clustering those program spaces into 3 or 4 or 5 kind of broad subcategories or headings, and then basically solving the problem by shifting those in relation to one another as you move up vertically, and then really just diagonally providing connections between those program spaces, between meeting spaces, staff spaces, parking, spiral book stacks, and then headquarters spaces, which is really what OMA does at the Seattle Public Library. They take the program, they group the program together, they shift, they kind of layer up and down, and then create kind of diagonal transitions between, and then basically wrap a form around that building. That's what Rem and Joshua Prince Ramus, who the two of them, I think, collaborated very closely on this project. That's what they have said and have written about in terms of the endeavor, or what their process that led to this very interesting building form. Also using the diagrid system in a slightly different way. It is a very effective way to make sort of inward sloping or outward sloping, depending on what perspective you're looking at, glass facade systems. The diagrid system really helps with doing that. So it helps a lot with doing this, with even doing that. And it actually creates, I think, a very interesting interior quality. Not sure if it's an interior quality that I would be comfortable in for a long period of time. But again, I guess on rare occasion when I was studying for architecture exams, there were times where I would spend 7, 8, 9, 10 hours in the library. But that's not what 99% of library visitors are doing. They're there for an hour, 2 hours at a time. And I actually think this is a very refreshing space for those kind of more limited experiences. But if you have an opinion otherwise, please share it on the comments of this video. I really enjoy when there is interaction, when you guys say, "Oh, this is a really cool building. I didn't know about this building," or "I like what Khan is doing here, or Korb is doing here." So it's a good opportunity. I'm curious actually to know what you guys think. Tell me what you think about Rem's Seattle Public Library project. There's actually a really good view of the interior quality of that sloping facade plane with using the diagrid system. So that's looking basically at the inside of that volume there. Also, one of the first libraries to start to think about new media, and the library not only being a repository for books, which we're starting to see libraries now in the last 5 or 10 years where, you don't even see book stacks in the library when you go. There is book stacks. There's basically book stacks down in a basement or up on upper level, and there's basically a robotic retrieval system. Anything you want is available to you within minutes, if not seconds. But the idea of what a library is changing, and I would argue that actually it started to change even with this project in 2004, where lots of spaces in this building are dedicated to new media, new methods of media, whether it's film, magazine, other alternative print media, radio recording spaces. I think there's even I believe people have actually gotten married in this building, so there is some sort of like a ceremonial space. I don't know if it's dedicated for that or if they're able to use it for that function, but This idea that a library can be much more than just a place to find books and read books. We talked about the program and the 5 stable clusters. They talk about the 4 unstable clusters, and I think those are the clusters that kind of modulate between the stable clusters. Views, light, and really this idea of the horizontal tower, which OMA was fascinated with for a period of about 15 years, the idea of the horizontal tower. If you're interested in that notion, look up OMA's CCTV tower to get a sense of what that kind of horizontal tower is. They even repeated again in a project in Southeast Asia. I can't remember where now, but this idea of basically we've been doing a tower now for 100 years, and so they're starting to explore the idea of what happens if you do the tower, but you basically lay the tower down and you do it in a horizontal plane, and you can see that kind of interest, that early interest, with what you're seeing here in some of these images. Okay, that's Seattle Public Library, and our last project for our contemporary work is this beautiful building, which is the Oslo Opera House in Oslo, Norway, built in 2007 by the architecture firm Snohetta. This is it's 38,500 square meters. It's an opera house, and it's an opera house that happens really on the edge of the waterfront, the Oslo harbor. And actually, you can walk on the entire kind of sloped plane that you're looking at that wraps the lobby of the opera space, and actually can walk all the way down into the building. So this idea that I don't know, you could, to some degree, you could pin this back to Korb's 5 points and the roof garden, and just taking the idea of the roof garden, actually sloping it so that you can actually embrace the ground plane while you're on the active roof garden if you walk far enough. To another degree, you can make the argument that this is starting this sort of international movement that we're seeing lots more of basically treating the building as solving the requisite program spaces, but then the architects also creating non-required program space on the outside that makes the building experience just as memorable as the spaces that you see on the inside. In some cases, maybe even more memorable. I mean, I would think this is a pretty memorable experience, whether you live there and this happens for you once a month, or whether you happen to be visiting and it's really the one and only time you're going to see this building and experience this. But to kind of, sit here, take off your shoes, roll up your pants, and actually walk into the water as you're walking down the roof plane of this opera building, I would think is a fairly unique experiences in the myriad experiences that are available to us in the world today. So they do 300 shows a year. It's a venue for ballet, for opera, for dance, and for concert. I'm going to show some slides here of the interior in a minute. The wave wall, again, you see it on the inside, is always done in timber. The factory is always done in metal, and the carpet, they refer to this, Snohetta refers to this as the carpet, is always done in stone. So this kind of rule system that they establish, that one could make an argument traces its roots back to Centre Pompidou, where they established their rule system and kind of color coded. Here, Snohetta is saying, when we in our project, whenever you see the wave wall, you're going to see that in timber. Whenever you see the factory spaces, you're always going to see those in metal, and then where you see the carpet, you're always going to see that in stone. Wave wall, inside of the wave wall. looking from the carpet through the transparent light box at the wood-clad wave wall. And then this would be kind of a detail through one of the areas with the metal. I don't have a good shot of the sort of factory, if you will, but suffice to say that they kind of establish that rule system and stick to that rule system of wave wall, timber, factory, metal, carpet, stone. 13, almost 1,400 seat auditorium here on the inside. Has some kind of semblance to Hans Scharoun's Berlin Philharmonic in terms of the interior quality. And actually, to some degree, is even a repeat of the idea. If you remember when I showed their Alexandria library project solution, kind of has the same, the tapering volume approaching the water at the Alexandria library. In that case, you can't actually go into the water the way you can beautiful in a kind of a, I would say a beautiful moment at the Oslo, the Norway Opera House, the Oslo Opera House in Norway. But maybe building up on that, as so many architects do, is they kind of learn from iterating and improve by iterating. Can be seen of it, for, at least for Snøhetta, a maturation of that original idea that they started with the Alexandria Library, that kind of tapered volume, and then exploring the idea of occupying that surface, calling it the carpet, giving it a kind of a functional purpose, and then actually extending that surface down into the water. One of many really interesting architectural projects in the contemporary period. There's so many. I wish I could cover a lot more than we can in the one semester that we have, but this really concludes our journey from humanism to the contemporary time period. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have enjoyed going back, looking at some of these buildings, which I learned about in architecture school, learning about some buildings which I didn't learn about in architecture school for the first time, in some cases doing a deeper read and a deeper study of them. And I think you'll find as you go through your career, both as a student and then professionally as an architect, a lot of these buildings that we've looked at will continue to come up. Not all, but many of them will continue to come up as the sort of more common reference points for us as architects and designers. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure. I will, as I mentioned, post one more lecture next week where I will do a review of probably about 20... I'm going to do a review of what I consider to be the 16 most important projects of the 20th century and the 21st century. And the final exam will feature 4, let's see, if I use a 4x4, if I use a 16 square grid for usually I know I use a 9 square grid, but if I use a 16 square grid divided by 2, that's 8. Okay, so out of the 16 projects that I will review in the final lecture, I'll go through them all, go through them in detail. I won't use the name of the building and I won't name the architect. I will leave that responsibility to you as you're studying for the exam to look it up and study and prepare. But out of those 16 buildings, there will be 8 of them on the final exam, and you will be writing about one of those 8 buildings on the final exam. And again, I will post a lecture where we basically do a review of those 16 projects. All right. Thank you for your time and your attention and all your hard work, and your creative thoughts and ideas and your articulated ideas about architecture and about what you're seeing and what you've liked and what you haven't liked. I've enjoyed every step of the way, and I hope that this sets you on your path as you continue your careers in architectural study and hopefully on through into architecture profession. Thank you. Email, call if you have any questions, and again, look for one final review lecture next week. Thanks.